I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars. This is stunning Lake Mountain in regional Victoria. Would you believe me that it's early autumn, 35 degrees back in Sydney, 6 degrees here at Lake Mountain, and this is the car to take on a road like this in. This is the new Volkswagen T-Roc R Grid edition, a more affordable version of the T-Roc R, a car that I haven't spent a huge amount of time with, and I'm looking forward to driving on proper roads here outside of Melbourne, because this looks like a tantalizing proposition. It's really a hot hatch pumped up a little bit, and of course that sounds good. It's got 221 kilowatts of power, it's got all-wheel drive, and it's way cheaper than a Golf Mark 8R. In fact, you can get out of a dealership for sub 60 grand drive away for this T-Roc R Grid, and in the year 2023, that sounds pretty damn good. So in today's video, we're going to check out this car and see if there's substance to it, both as a driving machine and as a vehicle to live with every day. So we'll check out the interior, back seat and boot, discuss the running costs, and then go for a spirited drive in the 2023 T-Roc R Grid Edition. But before we get started, hit subscribe below. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. All right, so rolling out now in the new T-Roc R Grid. High hopes, because on paper it certainly looks like a decent buy. There we go, there's that Volkswagen 2-litre turbo, proving why you don't need to be a brand new engine to be a good engine. This powertrain might have a couple of decades under its belt now or thereabouts, but heaps of updates over the years have kept it feeling fresh. And even though the T-Roc R's tune is not the whiz-bang 235 kilowatt tune from the Golf R and Tiguan R, it's still damn good, especially because this car is so small and light. So under the bonnet, we do have that 4-cylinder turbo petrol. It's making 221 kilowatts of power and 400 Newton meters of torque, which is a nice balanced amount for a car like this. It's kind of hard to explain what I mean by that, but you know, it is possible to be overpowered in this country especially. And 221 kilowatts and 400 Newton meters from this motor in the T-Roc R just feels really well suited, especially to a road like this at Lake Mountain, which is sinewy and technical and really just flows with the landscape, as does the car. This is one of those vehicles that strings together corners in a way that you can only really feel as intuitive once you get behind the wheel and just start to perceive the way this chassis strings bends together, the steering working with you, the body working with you, the stability control working with you. It's actually a joy. You look forward to the next corner and you know it's going to just come naturally to you, as opposed to always fighting the car, as is sometimes the case, even with sporty cars that are supposed to be well-tuned and engaging. They aren't always. Now, it's a bit of a throwback to the previous gen Golf R. I mean, it's quite similar in feel to that car. It's quite similar in feel to the new Golf R, if just dialed down one level of aggression and capability, because what we've got here is a little bit less power than that car, but we also have the previous gen sort of R all-wheel drive system, the Holdex all-wheel drive. We don't have the tricky rear differential from the new Golf R, so we don't have drift mode. This car will still oversteer under power, but only in very limited circumstances. It's better to think of this car as just an incredibly balanced little hot hatch with a small lift that has this gorgeous adjustable chassis and then really excellent traction out of bends because of its all-wheel drive system, more so than a front drive car. So in cold weather on a road like this that's quite greasy, you just make excellent progress in the T-Roc R, effortless progress. And if you want to think of it as point and shoot or a scalpel or boring, you can certainly do that, but that would be to ignore the fact that you can just toss this car around and really exploit the light front end and the super adjustable rear end, which will just float around behind you if you just turn the steering in a little bit more mid-corner. It's just glorious. So you can really make this car work with you, which has been a long-running strength of Volkswagen's hot hatches and now hot small SUVs. They haven't always been the ones with the most power. They haven't always been the ones with the hardest working front diffs, but what they do have is just a beautifully balanced chassis, high rigidity and expert tuning on the stability control system, which just helps you make great progress, even in stability control fully on, although one press of a button here puts you in ESC Sport, and it's going to just allow even more movement from the body, but without letting you get yourself into too much trouble, which is always nice. So you just tip it in. It's addictive. It's a really nice car to drive with various plateaus that you can get to depending on your confidence and skill level as a driver. And this is a car which would really teach you to be an even better driver with time. It flatters you. But that's on a great road like this. What about in ordinary circumstances, 99% of life, where you're just commuting, running errands, etc.? Well, it's pretty good at that. So we've got adaptive dampers in this car. It is the previous generation. Sorry, it is the previous generation Volkswagen adaptive damper with 3 modes rather than the new 15-stage damper, but it's pretty good. Comfort mode or normal mode are fine. They'll soak up most urban imperfections. It's still a little bit of a firm ride. I think most people are probably looking for that when they buy an R product, but it's not crashy, which is great as I drive over a crashy bump. But the point is that the absorption of mid-corner bumps is just excellent in this car. You don't get thrown off course like you do in some hot hatches, some hot small SUVs. It manages it really, really well. The steering is perhaps a tiny bit too heavy for my tastes, and that's in normal mode. You can make it even heavier if you put it into race steering, but I could certainly live with it. Love the paddle shifters located right behind where they're nice and easy to use, but the logic in the 7-speed wet clutch DSG automatic is great, so you don't actually need to interact with the paddle shifters unless you want to for giggles, really. Speaking of giggles, the exhaust is quite nice in this car. It's subtle, but if you lift, you will get a couple of subtle pops from out there behind you. Sounds good. The quad pipes look good on this car as well. Now, of course, this is no off-roader. It doesn't have too much ground clearance, but it has a subtle lift compared to a Golf and, of course, all-wheel drive. So I do think a gravel trail or something would be a lot of fun with this car, if you don't mind pitting the beautiful matte finish 19-inch Pretoria alloy wheels on this car, which are shot in sporty Hankook tyres that do strike a good balance between road noise and grip levels, which are pretty high in this car. Refinement as a whole is decent. It's a little noisy at times because of that sporty rubber, but it's not too bad. And on the safety front, you've got most systems in this car. You've got AEB, reversing AEB, adaptive cruise, and lane centering, which all works well. But because of the semiconductor shortage, you do miss out on blind spot monitoring, and that's also tied to rear cross traffic alert, which is a bit of an annoyance. It's a problem that Volkswagen's facing across their range at the moment, or much of their range. But if you can live with it, then that's up to you. I personally could live with it. So yeah, it's a really nicely rounded vehicle. Difficult to find problems with it or faults, especially at 54,300 plus on roads. I think it's pretty fair, and it's a real fun car to drive for that amount of cash. I'd like to spend a bit more time in it as well. The new T-Roc R Grid Edition really enters the Australian market at a price point that you used to be able to get a Golf R at. Now that car has become stratospherically more expensive, over 70 grand drive away. So you're really looking at a 15 grand cheaper vehicle here, but you're not actually taking that much of a step back in terms of accommodation. And I think for people that really love their sporty cars, the more stripped back aesthetic and spec of the Grid Edition will really appeal. And that starts with the T-Roc's interior, which is a little bit no nonsense, and that's great because the functions are exactly where you expect to find them and everything works really naturally. Part of the reason for that is that this cabin is a generation behind Volkswagen's newest interiors, but for a lot of people out there that'll be a good thing because some would argue that they were easier to deal with and live with in the past, like what you get here in the T-Roc. Now, that starts with a technology package based around a 9-inch touchscreen up here with wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, plus built-in navigation. That all works well. And a 10-inch virtual cockpit in front of the driver, which has quite a high degree of customization. You do have the new steering wheel with the touch capacitive controls, which VW have committed to scrapping in future, but once you live with the car for a while, you kind of get the hang of it. Plus, you get cool paddle shifters here, which are extended in size from the regular T-Roc. The climate controls too are their own little panel down here, so you're not digging through a touchscreen. That all works just great. And we're sitting in comfy, supportive, firm chairs, which are par for the course for a Volkswagen R product. Now, they are not leather with electric adjustment and memory and heating. They are cloth with manual adjustment and no heating. The steering wheel is heated, oddly, so on a cold day you just have to keep your paws up here on the wheel. But the seats, they look great and they're really comfy and they hold you in nice and tight in sporty driving. And that's kind of all they have to do. In terms of practicality, we've got that great adjustable armrest here so you can get into a comfy position for road trips. Big door bins that'll take water bottles, a tray down here, a couple of USB-C chargers, and sort of awkwardly small cup holders, it must be said. But there are some quality disappointments with the T-Roc, and there always have been. Volkswagen have finally given it a soft dashboard, but the doors are rock hard and the door bins themselves don't have that usual flock lining that sort of sets a Volkswagen apart from other brands, but the build quality on the whole feels incredibly well screwed together and tight. Here in the back of the T-Roc R Grid, it's clear that this is a relatively small vehicle, which is something that helps it feel agile and fun out on the road, but obviously there's going to be a compromise and part of that is in backseat space. But what's important is that sitting behind my own driving position, I've equalized this passenger seat with the driver's seat. I do have room and I'm an adult male, I'm 6 feet tall, or that's what my mum tells me, and I fit here in the back of the car just fine. Legroom is okay, toe room's generous, and headroom is absolutely fine, even with the optional panoramic sunroof fitted to this car. I think it might be a little bit more of a challenge getting something like a backwards facing child seat in here, so if you're in that situation, definitely turn up to the dealership with your baby seats and check that everything fits. But if you've got slightly older children, the T-Roc R would be an absolutely fine second car, for instance. In terms of the rest of the accommodation back here, we've got air vents, USB-C charging, and also a flip down armrest with a pass-through, so you could stick skis or a snowboard or something in here, which would be pretty fun. Now, similar quality to up front, well built, but not luxurious in terms of the finishes on things like the doors. But in terms of a small SUV with reasonable packaging inside, the T-Roc gets the job done. Moving around the back of the T-Roc R Grid, and it's a pleasantly subtle vehicle on the road, and I think that would be especially the case if you debadge the R and the Grid edition, as I probably would, because then you'd need to be a true Volkswagen train spotter to even know that this is more than a 110 kilowatt base model before you chop people off the line in the sub 5 second 0 to 100 as tested performance time. Of course, the quad tailpipes are a bit of a giveaway, and in terms of styling, the T-Roc R Grid is only available in lapis blue, black, or a dark glossy grey, so it's a fairly limited palette. Opening up the manual tailgate, semiconductor, that's not a power tailgate, and it reveals a 392 litre boot. It's reasonably usable, very similar in size to a Golf, but one nice trick up the T-Roc sleeve is that you actually do get a space saver spare in this car. Now, I know that's not as good as a full-size spare, but more and more these days, performance cars like this are not carrying any spare at all, so a space saver is definitely better than nothing, and that manual tailgate is actually quite light and easy to close. Running performance cars usually doesn't come cheap, but the T-Roc R is at least manageable. That starts with an upfront servicing plan that's a discount over paying every year. It's $2,950 for 5 years and 75,000 Ks, and given this is an all-wheel drive car with lots of fluids to service, I actually think that's reasonably fair. In terms of fuel consumption, the first thing to note is that the T-Roc R requires 98 octane at a minimum because of the particulate filter used in the vehicle. So refueling is going to be a bit more expensive than in some sporty cars, but if you're rocking a vehicle like this, please just use low sulfur 98 octane. But in terms of fuel efficiency, I got 10 litres per 100 Ks today on the nose, despite all of this spirited driving and some highway. But on the highway alone, I was getting almost 7 litres per 100, which is actually very, very frugal for a car like this, much more so than a Kona N or a GR Corolla. The warranty is 5 years with unlimited Ks. And lastly, in terms of insurance, in the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer spent $981 to comprehensively insure a new Volkswagen T-Roc. Your situation may vary and your premium may vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live and how you garage the car. So those are my impressions of the new Volkswagen T-Roc R Grid Edition. If you can't tell, I'm pretty happy with this car. It's got really nice levels of performance. The ride and handling is balanced and appropriate. And as a performance car for Australia, it's just really suitable because it's fun to drive and quick, but not so quick as to risk your license all the time on our speed enforced, tight and technical roads where this thing just does so well. I do wish it had a couple of extra features, heated seats being one on a cold day like today, but there's always the full fat T-Roc R if you want that stuff. And for the price, which I think is very fair in 2023, this thing is a little rocket. The icing on the cake is that you'll actually be able to get one, which is quite novel in this day and age. There's 300 T-Roc R Grid editions on a boat offshore of Australia waiting to dock right now. Not many of them have actually sold as yet, so you'll probably be able to just walk in and get one. And if you do want the additional features from the full fat model, there's over 1,000 of those on their way to Australia as we speak, because the German factory has just turned up the volume massively on the Aussie allocation, and that is a good news story. Very keen to know your opinions, so let me know down below in the comments. While you're there, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.